Okay, my name is Joe Callahan. I was born and brought up in Newburyport. I lived on Greenlee Street, number 4 Greenlee Street. Graduated from Newburyport High School in 1952. And I was on the fire department in Newburyport for many, many years. And then I moved over to Salisbury in 1972. And I was fire chief in Salisbury for 17 years before I retired. And I spent a lot of time doing researching history of the greater Newburyport area now.
My name is Ronnie Teo, and I was born here, 83 years next month. I was here when most of the roads in town were dirt. We didn't have any tar roads. Hanover Street, you know Hanover Street where I live, that was a dirt road. Do you remember the pump at the end of the street?
No, I don't.
Yeah, there was a pump there for guy, and that, of course, the name of that street was not Hanover Street. That was Floyd's Lane, and that was Floyd who lived at the end of the street. And everybody used to go up there, and a lot of people, most of the people, didn't even have wells. They'd go up there and get their water out of a pump in the middle of the street. That was a long time ago. You expect me to remember anything 83 years ago?
My name is Jim McGuire. I was born in Newburyport on February 19th, 1930. I've lived here all my life. They can't get rid of me. I lived on Union Street and Water Street, combined down the end of it at a point, and on the other end was the south end of Marlborough. And that area, if you look at a map of Newburyport, it looks just like a flat iron, and that's exactly what it is. They used to call the point Flatiron Point, and it was called Joppy, and it was spelled Joppy. And if you lived there, you were a Joppyite. That's what everybody called you, that he's a Joppyite.
My name is Jeanne Doyle. I grew up for the first 10 years of my life next to the Emma Andrews Library on Purchase Street. It was a great place to live. Unfortunately, sometimes it has a bad reputation because people think it was a very dangerous place to live. On the other hand, if you'd listen to all the females who lived down there, you'd find out it was a very nice place to live.
I am Bob Richard. I grew up on Charter Street in Newburyport. My mother's family goes back to 1635, Newbury first settlers. My dad's family is French-Canadian. And I'm one of 4. I have 2 brothers and a sister. And my grandparents lived on the same street as I. A lot of interaction with cousins. My dad's was a big family. My mother's was a smaller family. I went to the French school in Newburyport and the French church as well. It was an important part of my life. It was a very small school. There were only 8 students in my graduating class.
Guess I must have started in about 1937, 1938. The largest class ever entered in the Woodbridge School. 26 kids in my first grade. And you know how many people of those 26 kids ended up graduating? Just me, all alone.
Is that right?
Oh yeah. About 90% of them got held back in the 3rd or 4th grade. And anyway, I graduated in the smallest class ever graduated from Woodbridge School. There were 4 of us, and they all started before me. One of them started 3 or 4 or 5 years before me, and then the other 2, they just stayed back once.
Well, the French came in the 1880s, and they used to go to Immaculate Conception, but the language was a problem. So they wanted to start their own parish. So they started it, and they built the church in 1902, and subsequently the school as well. And we had the Sisters of Joan of Arc. They were a Canadian religious order, and they came down from Ottawa. Yeah, I was 5. I didn't go to kindergarten. They put me right into first grade. And the classes were very small. And the classes used to be mixed. They'd have first and second grade in one large room. And they would, and the subsequent grades as well. And they would start lecturing to one grade while the other grade was doing an assignment. That there were probably 30 in both grades. And our classes were taught exclusively in French in the morning, and in the afternoon the classes were English. Well, the French school closed in 1963, and the French church, I think around the year 2000, the French church closed because the archdiocese wanted to consolidate parishes. There were too many small churches.
Well, we always had fun. Went swimming and went to the beach and drove sand buggies, dune buggies, never registered them. We always had something to do.
Children were much freer than they are today. Parents weren't constantly looking out to see where you were. You went outdoors to play and they expected you to come in when you were supposed to come in. So what would seem abnormal to a person today would be when I was 5 years old. My friends mostly were a year ahead of me, and they were off to the Brown school. I was kind of alone. So I would think nothing of walking up around the corner, down Madison Street, across the street, and playing the boats there at the landing. No one would even think of allowing their children to do that at 5 years of age today. But that's the way it was. They didn't expect you to do that.
We swam at Simmons Beach. Simmons Beach was started in 1933, I think it was. And it was just a huge stone there with a ramp where the boats climbers used to bring the boats in, and after they were climbing out in the river, and they take them to the clam shanties that were there, and they prepare them and sell them to the people. And after a while, on that beach, the man that became the Ward 1 councilor, his name was Herbert Simmons. And he got the city to go down and bring up a bunch of sand. They brought truckloads after truckloads. They filled the whole area in. It was just like going down to Plum Island on the beach, and it was in the river. The only problem was the river was filthy because all the sewage from the whole city of Newburyport and all the way up around the river used to come down in that river and used to back up in that area. So eventually, in the summertime, we stayed there all the time. We never left that area. We used to walk. We take our shoes off. All we ever wore was the bathing suit. No shoes. Run across the clamshells with bare feet. Never bother us or anything. So we toughened our feet up. And so eventually, they come to realize that we were in real danger of swimming in that water. So they closed the whole river off for swimming. And then the beach that was there just kind of petered away, and it just went. Now there's no sand there. It's all eelgrass and a little bit of a ramp that there's no wood or anything, and that's the way it is.
Simmons Beach. Simmons was the counselor at that time, and he decided he wanted to do something for the poor people down there. And so every summer, there were special days, but there were several days in the week, and they had this party light. Well, they had things for the boys that took place up on what is now Beacon Street in Newburyport, and that's where the baseball field was. That's all they had, either that or Cashman Park, you know. And so that they would have games for them, and prizes and everything for the teams. And then everyone would go down and go swimming. And I think I have a picture in the book of the kids in swimming at Simmons Beach. He had sand brought in, and it was a pretty good beach.
Something here. Well, on one of these stories, it tells about Jeanne Doyle, how she was the beauty queen. That was back in 1934.
And then they had the beauty contest, and one was for the upper teenage girls, and the other was for children. Now, my sisters were supposed to be taking care of me because my mother played bridge every Wednesday afternoon, so that's what I know what day it was. And my sister wasn't too happy over dragging me along to this party. I was in the same grubby little sunsuit I had been wearing all day, which wasn't particularly clean, and she drags me down there. Now, obviously, the judges at the contest thought I must have been the poorest of the poor, the way I was dressed. And so they gave me the prize for Miss Simmons Speech. And I have a picture of it out in my yard with the big banner across Miss Simmons Speech. We still have the banner. My daughter does, one of my daughters.
Most of the mothers stayed home at the time, and it was really nice. But I remember when we got our first television in 1947, it was a little 10-inch screen. And I think we were the first ones in the neighborhood to get the television. We used to have, television didn't come on till about 5 o'clock. There used to be a test pattern on the screen. And Howdy Doody was big in those days. And our house was full of the neighborhood kids.
I'm sure.
Looking at that test pattern, wait for Howdy Doody come on at 5 o'clock.
That's awesome.
Yeah, in the whole living room. My mother just loved it, having all the kids there.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
We're standing out here just off of Greenleaf Street. Right, the house behind me is the house I grew up in back in the late 30s and the 40s and the 50s. And this neighborhood has changed quite a bit since I was a kid growing up. We're at the site of the rear of the CVS drugstore now. Years ago when I was growing up back in the 40s and the 50s, this was a very busy place, but it had a different occupancy out here. The B&M freight station was here for many, many years. And here on Greenleaf Street, there was 5 sets of tracks that crossed the street going into the yard. It was a busy place. The trains came in, the engines came in just about every morning and left freight cars. Right over here on the right, there was a huge building. It used to be the Glen Mills Cereal Company. And over further to the left was the big freight house, over about where the kids are playing over there in the play yard now. That was a long, big wooden building, the freight house. And in the middle of that, probably about where the end of the CVS drugstore is now, there was a platform there. When I was a kid, it wasn't unusual to see freight cars come in with automobiles and trucks. They didn't come over the road like they do today so much. Call a Chevrolet and the Ford Company and all the automobile agencies in Newburyport, their deliveries, most of them used to come right here off of the Pond Street Depot.
Coles Pond, they must have been half a dozen huge ice houses, all 3 or 4 stories high, and they keep cutting ice, putting it in, and then they'd put hay on top of it, and they'd start another few layers, and that ice stayed there all summer long. We used to go out there and have skating parties in the middle of summer in the ice houses. See, every block they put up in there was a block, and that was 25-cent block of ice. And everybody had signs they put in the window. Like we used to have quills, that was quills. Then they'd have, there was Hartnett, there were a whole bunch of them around Newburyport. And they all cut ice, and then sell ice year-round to keep your food cold.
Okay, when by the time, that I was really old enough to understand what was going on, the Depression was on, and we had a place called Knuckers uptown where people went who didn't have any money. Now my father, it wasn't a big paying job, but he had a job, and he had a company car. So he had his own car, plus he had a company car. And but there were a lot of people who didn't have any money. And Mike Tarandro always told the story of how he used to go there and you could get food and you could get clothing. But the food wasn't always there. Shipments would come in. They might get a shipment of bananas, and everyone would rush down to get bananas. The staples that were usually there were things like flour. There were things like that, and beans. You could usually get those. But then on special days, something would come in, and people would rush up to get it. And what I found interesting was some people never wanted to take charity, and they were very ashamed if they had to go. Other people took it with, okay, this is it. And we had a woman in the neighborhood, if, for instance, eggs came in, she would just make egg salad sandwiches for her kids and go off and have a picnic.
We went to the Johnson estate. We used to go there on Saturdays, and they had a big floor, and they'd have all the equipment. They have mops and stuff, and 3 or 4 of us would go in and we'd mop the floor, let it dry, and then we used to wax it from. Then she'd give us a dime so we'd go to the movies. And that's what it cost to get in the movies at that time, was 10 cents. That's how we did it. And we also used to weed the gardens. She paid us to weed the gardens. They had a cider press there, and it was a hand cranked one, and they had russet apple trees there. They were the best apples there was for cider, and she used to let us use the thing, but we had to have a parent with us before we could press our own cider.
That's when this company called Suffolk Farms, who was stationed in Revere, came to Newbury, and they were doing spinach, and that's what they were growing. And so it was different in that these kids from Boston came, and a lot of these were kids who had been in the name of the truant homes, but they had been in a form of jail before. They were different. They were street kids. They were kids who knew their way around that way. And so taking that element into Newbury made some changes. But if they fit in, I mean, it fit in and all, but it was a different thing for Newbury to have that kind of people down there.
And
These are city people.
That's at the current Spencer Pierce Little Farm.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, you probably don't even know this, but did you know my uncle just had to get in the service? So he enlisted as a private, as an MIT graduate. And he, just as fast as they were getting killed, he was putting on more stripes. So he was General Patton's first engineering officer. And he put the first bridge across the Rhine in World War II. They were putting that across. It was a double Bailey. And so we used to go shopping all the time, you know, at a Wells' store on Brownfield Street. And I remember them very distinctly coming. I was with my mother, I was only about this tall, telling that her brother had just been killed. And we just sat there. Never forget it. But boy, he was a smart cookie. Boy, some of those veterans went through hell. Of course, I didn't see my father for over 4 years. Yep. He was in the service. And, he was the commanding officer of the Northern Occupation Forces in Japan.
So, can you tell me about, so World War II, I mean, you were a teenager at that point during World War II.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about what was happening in the area or what you remember?
Well, they used to have blackouts. Every night was blackout time. They would, you had to either paint your windows black or you put a black curtain over it so no light could show through it. And if they had air raid wardens out, and they were mostly women that lived in the area, they picked them for it. And if you had a light, they'd knock on your door and tell you to put it off or cover it up. And that's what we had to do. But other than that, we never, during the day, there was not much happening in Newburyport. It was all over Salisbury Beach where the battery was. and then up further along up towards Portsmouth, they were up that way. They were mostly watching for boats and submarines in case they come in. There was a bunch of them down where the polio camp was, and before the polio camp, that's what it used to be. It was a Coast Guard, and they were down there watching for any people trying to come into the city, and down through there, that way. So, other than that, we hardly knew there was anything going on. There was always things going on for get buy bonds and do this for the government and do that. We always was there doing all that stuff. So we kept pretty busy doing it.
Well, I not old enough to actually remember the war, but I can remember having condensed milk at home, and I can remember because of the sugar shortage, and I can remember having margarine. My mother would put a tablet in it to make it yellow because there was a shortage of butter. And I can remember the toys after World War II, and I can remember having a little Jeep, and I looked inside the Jeep, and I could see it was made out of a Schlitz beer can, and it was made in occupied Japan.
But what I remember too about the war is in the years leading up to it, in like say 38 and 39 and everything, before we got in it, my sister, who was 8 years older, used to have a lot of friends over on the porch. My father was very outgoing. He welcomed all these young people over. And the songs that were being played at that time were all about the South Pacific. And, you know, Dorothy Lamour was the big star and everything like that. And everybody wanted to go to the South Pacific. Well, some of these same guys who were on that porch ended up in the Pacific. And one in particular, the husband of one of my sister's friends, died there. And he is buried in, on the Big Island and in the cemetery there. So they did, what they found was not exactly what they thought they were going to find. Yeah. Now, there's a big division, because when I interviewed people for my book, I found that one of the questions, or I had the students do a lot of the interviews, I said, find out what part of the service they chose to go in and why. And very often people, because they associated Newburyport with the water, took the Navy. But there were plenty of, if you got drafted, you got put in the Army. That was the whole difference there. And a lot of people didn't want to go in the Army particularly, so they signed up first and went in the Navy. Mm-hmm. And so we had people in the theater, European theater, and the Pacific theater. And there's a big difference there in the way the war was fought and everything. And you couldn't go far because you couldn't buy tires. The only ones who could get the tires were the people who were driving to the Navy Yard and taking like 4 people with them, 4 or 5 people with them.
Can you remember, the death of JFK? Do you remember what you're...
Oh, I know exactly where the shingle I was putting on.
I think everybody does.
Yeah.
I think everybody does. That's one that stands out in everyone's mind.
So can you tell me about that?
Well, I was shingling on the side of a house down on the Plum Island Turnpike. Came over the radio. I just stopped. I couldn't do a damn thing. Because, see, I knew him. I went to Governor Dummer, and he came out of the service right off of PT 109 in our public speaking class. He came in there, and he spoke to us. He wasn't any bigger than my thumb. No kidding you. He was quite a guy. And so anyway, my wife says, and it's the truth too, I have never voted for a Democrat in my life except Jack Kennedy. And he could run for anybody and I'd vote for him. He was a nice guy.
Well, Dick Sullivan's wife opened the door. Jack and I were working out in the yard, and she opened the door and she said, there's some tragic news coming on television. And she said, President Kennedy has been shot down in Texas. So, as I remember, we went in the house and looked at the television for a few minutes, and they were showing pictures of what was going on down in Texas. And then, of course, it wasn't very long when the word was passed over the television that the president had passed away because of his injuries as a result of the shooting, and I can remember that. And of course, there was several days of mourning for the president following that. I can remember them very vividly. All the flags were half-staffed. Some of the stores were closed, and it was a very sad moment in time, period in time.
Somebody came in the garage and told me that JFK had died, and geez, I thought, what's going to happen to this country now? I mean, JFK was so popular, and he seemed to have everything in control. And I remember watching television for 3 days, and I actually recorded the event on my old tape recorder. It was just such a sad time. And then there was the assassination on television of Jack Ruby. We witnessed it live. It was incredible. And the country got through that, but it was tough times. Yeah, people were really, they felt really close to John F. Kennedy, especially in this area because he was a Massachusetts boy.
I hope that there are several people in the Newburyport area now, and I'm sure this is true throughout the region. There are several people that are interested in, like I am, in history, and there's a lot of people doing research in Newburyport. Unfortunately, I don't see too many of the real younger people coming along doing it. Probably when they get a little older, I'm hoping that some of these younger people, there's a lot of smart kids around. I hope that when they get a little older that they will take more of an interest in the history and take advantage of some of the things that they have locally. There's an awful lot of history available at the Historical Society and at the archival unit down at the Newburyport Public Library. I don't see many younger people, I don't mean little kids, but younger adults that are all that interested in history now. But my hope is that over the next coming years, as they grow older, that they will take more of an interest in it and carry on for those of us that are carrying it on now.
So I understand you've been recognized in the area for the work you've done.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you, and why have you done writing books? Why do you do this?
Well, I didn't start out to do it. I started at a committee at the Historical Society. I was on the board, and I said, we've got a lot of history about the 1600s, 1700s. You don't have anything in the 20th century. And I looked up the mission statement, and the mission statement for the Historical Society was to record history. That was the first item. Nothing had been done about World War II. And the whole 20th century, they thought it was too soon. And I said, if we don't do it now, we're not going to have the information, because other people have written at the time when it was happening. We got to do that. So, okay, they finally said, go ahead, and formed a committee and everything. But it's not easy working with a committee. Not everybody shares your enthusiasm for it, and a lot of people just decided they would do just a little piece. Well, finally, for various reasons, it got to the point where I figured I'd better go off on my own. So I did because I was doing a chronology. And so I did the chronology of the first 50 years, and it was very well received. I'm not a writer. I've tried to tell people that. I recorded. In other words, I'm not painting the big picture for you. I am telling you what happened. You decide what you think about it, Yeah. If you got the facts, okay, well, how do you feel about it? So, that's cool. And so that's how I got going on actually writing book one. And it was very much helped by a man named Ron Irving, who had done a lot of research. And I found out just by chance what he had done. And he was able to use a lot of his material, and I gave him credit for it. He did it. We have a resource in that library with what he did that no other community around has. And he had just spent years doing research, but he was a very quiet, reserved man, and not too many people knew about it. So that's a big source in that library. And I liked fitting it in the history with my classes. Like, even if I was doing international relations, I could use Caleb Cushing when he was our envoy to China and fit all that in. This is how Newburyport played a part in what happened there. And everything I could do that affected us in that, I fit in. So then in the 1995 era, I had the kids do a lot of interviewing at times. And you got some great stories, you know, about real stories about the lives that their parents or grandparents lived. And so we were having so much luck with that, we decided to publish book pamphlets. So we published 3 different pamphlets. 2 of them were mostly on the Great Depression, and then the 3rd one was on World War II. And that's the only source we have of all those men. I mean, we didn't get every man, but we got a lot of people. And that's the only source in Newburyport that you have of what they did, why they went, where they went, and what they did. So I have to say it's a nice place to live.
Cool.
Because you know people. Obviously, I've lived here all my life. A year ahead of me was Byron Matthews and George Lawler were a year ahead of me in school. Sullivan was a few years behind. These are people I've known all my life. So when I went to write this book, I had it from the base up of knowing about what was going on in Newburyport. Makes it a lot easier to write if you know the people. You know who to ask. And it was very interesting. So it goes on. When people, you know, if I can help people, I do.
So what's your what would you say to somebody that the future, you know, what do you say to the future and history and the importance of history, you know?
Oh, I think it's very important because the people from historic New England who were involved in this prize thing and everything said, you know, especially like the second book, people will think, oh, well, it's too soon to write about it. It isn't. 50 years from now, people are certainly going to appreciate everything you said that was going on in the city at that time. It gives them something to work with.
Yeah.
So I think it was rewarding. I didn't do it to make money. You do not make money, believe me. It cost me money. But it was like a gift. That's my gift to the city for, you know, the fact that I've lived here, the city and the town, because it included what went on in Newbury too, which isn't too much.